Hello, friends. We are interested in the geography of our views, so please like and write in the comments from which city are you watching us, and were there loud stories of betrayal in your city? Perhaps the next story about betrayal will be from your city, and we start. The sun's rays lazily penetrated through the soft cream curtains, softly spreading across the bedroom. It was Sunday morning, and the house had that special atmosphere of calm and happiness that usually appears in family films and Christmas card advertisements. James slowly opened his eyes, watching the rays play on the gentle face of his wife Hannah. She slept next to her, smiling slightly in her sleep, her blonde hair softly falling onto the pillow, making her look like the heroine of some beautiful fairy tale. He smiled, unable to contain the tenderness that filled his heart. Carefully, so as not to disturb his wife, James turned his head towards the crib, which stood a little further away. Little Sophia was also asleep, wrapped in a cozy blanket with little pink bunnies on it. Her tiny hands, clenched into fists, sometimes trembled in her sleep, as if the baby was trying to grab something invisible, magical. James involuntarily held his breath, admiring his daughter. Sophia was barely 6 months old, and he still couldn't believe that this blue-eyed, blonde-haired girl, who looked incredibly like Hannah, was his daughter. He carefully kept in his memory every day of her life, from the very moment he first heard her cry in the delivery room. "Are you awake?" Hannah whispered quietly, opening her eyes and giving her husband a sleepy, but the most beautiful smile in the world. "I've been admiring you for a long time." James gently touched her forehead with his lips. "You and Sophia slept so sweetly that I was afraid to even breathe." Hannah laughed softly and moved closer, pressing her cheek to his shoulder. "You are my incorrigible romantic, James. I can't even believe that we've been together for so many years." 3 years and 7 months, he clarified proudly, hugging her. "The best 3 years and 7 months of my life." "And mine," she added quietly, looking up and looking him straight in the eyes. In those blue eyes, he saw the whole world: tenderness, love, loyalty, everything that made his life complete. A quiet sound was heard outside the bedroom door, and a moment later little Sophia began to toss and turn in her crib, opening her huge eyes full of curiosity. "Who woke up here?" Hannah said in a whisper, sitting up on the bed and stretching out her hands to the baby. "Come here, my beauty." James watched as his wife carefully lifted her daughter from the crib, wrapping her in a blanket and holding her to her chest. Sophia, feeling the warmth and smell of her mother, immediately stopped fidgeting restlessly and lay down in her arms with a contented look. "She's growing up so fast," James said, smiling slightly sadly. "Just yesterday she was so tiny, but today she's almost sitting up." "And he'll go to school tomorrow," Hannah said jokingly, stroking Sophia's back. "But now she's still our baby, and I want to enjoy every moment." "Me too." James smiled and got out of bed, going to prepare breakfast. The house was filled with cozy sounds: the quiet gurgle of the coffee maker, the rustling of the pages of Hannah's favorite magazine, and the joyful babble of Sophia playing with rattles on the living room carpet. The morning was exactly what James had dreamed of when he first asked Hannah to become his wife. When breakfast was ready, James carried a tray of hot toast, orange juice, and coffee into the living room, sitting down next to his wife and daughter on the soft sofa. Hannah immediately laid her head on his shoulder, and Sophia seemed to decide that now was the time to reach for her daddy's plate. "Hey," James said, laughing, moving the toast away from little playful hands. "It's too early for you, baby." Hannah laughed with him, and this moment was perfect: a cozy home, a beloved wife, a daughter who grows every day and becomes more and more beautiful. It seemed that their happiness was so complete and absolute that nothing threatened it. At that moment, none of them could imagine that this ideal world would one day be shaken, and they would have to face trials that would test the strength of not only their marriage, but also their very faith in love. For now, they were happy, absolutely and irrevocably. James was enjoying his family Sunday, and it seemed to him that everything should always be like this. He believed that this is what true happiness looks like: in simple, but so dear to the heart moments when loved ones are nearby and only a bright future lies ahead. and he could not even imagine how soon their ideal life would change forever. 3 years flew by unnoticed, like calendar pages torn off by the wind. Sophia turned 3.5 years old, and she became an even more charming and restless girl. Her ringing laughter often resounded throughout the house, filling it with joy and life. However, now it sounded more and more often against the background of tired silence between James and Hannah. James sat in the kitchen, looking out the window, outside which the autumn wind lazily swirled bright yellow leaves. He's tired, and not just from everyday work or from household chores, but from the misunderstanding that was slowly taking root between him and his wife. He noticed how Hannah gradually moved away, engrossed in her work in the design studio. Her eyes, once full of tenderness and warmth, now more often reflected cold concentration on the next project. "Hannah, maybe the three of us can take a walk in the park this evening," he asked, watching his wife pack her things, preparing for the next meeting. She raised her head, but her gaze was distracted, as if the question had taken her by surprise. "Today, I have a meeting with clients. A very important project," she answered quickly, as if with a prepared text. "Maybe another time?" He sighed heavily, trying to hide his disappointment. "Okay, another time." Hannah quickly threw on her coat and, briefly kissing him on the cheek, hurried to the exit. The door closed behind her, leaving behind only silence, diluted by the quiet sound of the cartoons that Sophia was watching in the living room. Later in the evening, returning from work, James saw his neighbor's car near the house. The neighbor, Mark, a tall and smiling man, was always friendly and open. Lately, James has noticed that Hannah is spending more and more time with him, either discussing the interior design of their new home or just drinking coffee in the backyard. He tried not to think about it, convincing himself that it was just friendly communication, but the uneasy feeling inside was growing every day. As he entered the house, he heard quiet laughter coming from the kitchen. Hannah and Mark stood near the table, bending over the sketches. Their faces were close to each other, and there was something subtly intimate about it. James froze in the doorway, feeling his insides shrink. "Good evening," he said calmly, forcing himself to smile. Hannah raised her head sharply, as if she had been caught by surprise. "James, hi. We were discussing plans for setting up a new office for Mark." "Yes, your wife is just great at this," Mark smiled, moving a little further and patting James on the shoulder. "I'm lucky to have such a neighbor." "Of course, lucky," James answered dryly, trying to hide his irritation and vague anxiety. "Hannah is really talented." After Mark left, James walked up to Hannah and gently touched her shoulder. "Hannah, you've hardly been home in the evenings for a week now. Sophia misses you, and so do I. What's happening?" She turned to him, irritation flashed in her eyes. "You know that I am very busy at work. This is temporary." "Are you sure it's just about work?" he asked quietly, looking her straight in the eyes. She sighed, avoiding his gaze. "James, please don't start. It's not easy for me anyway. I'm just tired." She went into the bedroom, and he remained standing in the middle of the kitchen, feeling how slowly but inevitably their marriage was beginning to become covered with deep, barely noticeable cracks. It was Friday evening. Sophia was visiting her grandmother for the second day, who loved spending time with her granddaughter, and James was looking forward to spending the evening alone with Hannah. He hoped that they could talk calmly, remember the old times, and find each other again in the warm silence of a cozy home. Returning home earlier than usual, James noticed an unfamiliar car parked near the house. His heart sank for a moment, but he hastened to push away the disturbing thoughts, assuring himself that this was just another client of Hannah. But when he entered the house, his heart beat even faster, telling him that something was wrong. The house was quiet, suspiciously quiet. Taking off his shoes, James slowly walked through the living room, listening to every sound. On the table in the kitchen, there were 2 glasses of wine, one of which was clearly masculine. A chill ran down James' spine, and his breathing quickened. He moved further down the corridor, approaching the bedroom. With every step, the heart beat louder, echoing with a painful pounding in the temples. The door was ajar, and one glance was enough for him to understand everything. On the bed where she and Hannah had recently shared their happiest moments, she was now with another man, Mark. Laughter, whispers, and those intimate gestures that were intended only for him now belonged to someone else. "What's going on here?" James swung the door open, his voice full of anger and pain. Hannah screamed, pushing Mark away and covering herself with the sheet as he hurriedly jumped up, trying to get dressed. "James, wait, I'll explain everything." Hannah's voice trembled with fear and confusion. "What exactly will you explain?" His voice broke, his eyes were full of anger and pain. "Why did you sleep with our neighbor in our own bed?" "James, I'm sorry. It was a mistake. I didn't mean to." Tears flowed down her cheeks, but in his eyes they meant nothing now. "Error?" he asked with contempt. "It's not a mistake, Hannah. This is betrayal. You betrayed not only me, you also betrayed our daughter, our home, our family." "Listen, James, it's not what you think," Mark tried to interject, but immediately fell silent, meeting James's murderous gaze. "Get out of here now," James snapped in his direction, unable to contain his anger any longer. Mark hurriedly left, leaving them alone. Hannah, barely holding back tears, looked at James, but in her gaze there was not so much guilt as despair. "James, give me a chance. I'll fix everything, please." He shook his head, feeling his heart breaking into 1,000 small pieces. "I can't forgive this, Hannah. You destroyed everything we had. Leave, now." She froze, as if she couldn't believe her ears. "You can't kick me out of the house. This is our home. There is no us anymore. You chose it yourself. Get out," he repeated, turning away so as not to see her tears. Hannah stood up, trembling, and began to dress, avoiding his gaze. Silently, she collected the necessary things and, looking back at him one last time, left, quietly slamming the door behind her. The sleepy haze of a winter morning enveloped the streets when James, barely waking up, felt a familiar feeling of heaviness in his heart. The last days seemed to him not just gloomy, they were saturated with pain and anxiety, as if the entire world around him had ceased to exist, leaving room only for court hearings, legal terms, and painful thoughts. A week after he kicked Hannah out of the house, a series of events occurred that took the last of his strength. Hannah officially filed for divorce, and now their family, which had once seemed indestructible to him, was rapidly disintegrating before his eyes. The most unbearable part of this whole situation was that Hannah decided to fight for custody of Sophia, intending to keep the girl. Sophia just turned 4 years old and is too young to truly understand why mom and dad no longer live together. The first days after Hannah took Sophia with her, the girl called her dad in the evenings, crying, asking when they would return home, to their familiar surroundings, to their toys, to a cute stuffed rabbit, and to daddy's funny jokes. Each such call burned James's heart, and he could hardly hide his own tears. The house, in which the daughter's cheerful laughter had recently been heard, now seemed gloomy and empty. In the living room, everything remained in its place: the sofa, James' favorite chair, and even the toy dollhouse that he made with his own hands when Hannah had another project and could not pay attention to her daughter. Now this house, once full of life and children's fantasies, stood in the corner, a reminder that the family had broken up. The day of the first court hearing arrived. The courtroom was small, the walls seemed cold and lifeless, which made it even more alarming. James, dressed in a formal suit, sat at a long table with a lawyer next to him. On the other side of the hall were Hannah and her lawyer. At subsequent meetings, they had to discuss the details of the divorce, property issues, alimony, and most importantly, Sophia's future. But the first meeting decided only intermediate issues, where the child will live in the near future, while the final decision has not yet been made. James tried to look composed, but deep down he felt afraid, like a little boy in trouble. Memories flashed before his eyes. Here he was with Hannah and Sophia walking through the park, holding the baby by the hands. Here they were celebrating her first birthday, and here was a family dinner in the kitchen, where Sophia got everything dirty while helping him bake cookies. Now all these moments were like in another life. The judge, an elderly man with a good-natured face, addressed the parties. Gentlemen, today we have a hearing on the issue of temporary custody of minor Sophia Lawrence. I asked the parties to speak out. Hannah's lawyer was the first to rise. Your Honor, my client is the mother of the child. She has provided her care since birth, and there is a strong emotional connection that is inappropriate to break now. Mrs. Lawrence has housing, sufficient funds, and the ability to be with Sophia most of the day. We believe that the child should remain with the mother until a final decision on custody is made. James clenched his fists under the table, trying to contain his excitement. He understood that he needed to remain calm so as not to give reason to doubt his adequacy. Mr. Lawrence, the judge turned to him, do you have any objections? James stood up, straightening his back. Your Honor, I am Sophia's father, and I love her more than life itself. We used to live as one family, and I was always there. I changed her diapers, played with her when my wife was busy at work. I'm afraid that if I leave my daughter with her mother now, I will be completely removed from her life. My wife cheated on me with her neighbor, and this is what caused our separation. I fear that Hannah will not be able to provide the stability that her daughter needs. In addition, she is already immersed in work, constantly disappearing somewhere. He paused, realizing that his words sounded more like emotional accusations than legal arguments. I'm ready to give my daughter love and protection, he continued more calmly. Our house remained the same. I kept everything that was important to her. If my daughter lives with me now, I promise that I will not interfere with communication with my mother. It's only important to me that Sophia doesn't have to rush between us. Having finished, he slowly sat down, feeling a tense pause hanging in the hall. Hannah's lawyer quickly took advantage of this. Your Honor, Mr. Lawrence is exaggerating. My client is a successful designer. She has a stable income and a good reputation. Yes, they had family drama, but this is not a reason to deprive a child of his mother. Moreover, there is no evidence that Mrs. Lawrence is not paying enough attention to her daughter. The judge nodded understandingly and, frowning, leafed through the papers. I listened to both sides. While we have no grounds to deprive the mother of her right to custody, at the same time, I took into account Mr. Lawrence's words. At this stage, I make an interim decision. Sophia remains with her mother, but Mr. Lawrence has the right to regular visits and weekends with his daughter. The final custody verdict will be made at the next hearing when we review all the facts and circumstances. James's heart sank at these words. He knew that the likelihood of such a decision was high, but he still hoped for a miracle. Hannah's gaze met his, and something like relief, mixed with guilt, flashed in her eyes. However, she quickly looked away. When the meeting ended, Hannah and her lawyer quickly left the room, trying not to cross paths with James. He stayed to check a few details with his lawyer, trying to figure out the next steps. Then he slowly walked towards the exit, feeling empty. Mark was waiting for him at the door. James gritted his teeth when he saw the face of this man who had caused their demise, or at least partially contributed. "Why are you here?" James asked with cold anger. Mark raised his hands as if in surrender. "I came to support Hannah. I understand that this is a difficult time for both of you. I'm sorry this happened." "It's a pity," James grinned. "Your regret will not change anything. You destroyed my family." He turned away and walked towards the car, not wanting to continue the conversation, which would not end well anyway. That night, lying in his empty bedroom, James stared at the ceiling, trying to rethink everything that had happened over the past weeks. Hannah seemed to have completely turned into a stranger. Until recently, he could not imagine that she was capable of such a thing, but now their communication was reduced to formal dialogues about their daughter and the upcoming trial. In the following days and weeks, life seemed to freeze in a state of anticipation, waiting for the next meeting, waiting for a meeting with Sophia on the weekends. He tried to do his best at work in order to occupy himself with at least something, and every free minute he thought through how to prove to the court that he could be the best parent. His lawyer advised him to collect positive references from neighbors, colleagues, family, friends. James met with everyone and asked for written evidence of how he cared for his daughter, so that he would have real arguments in court. Meanwhile, Hannah seemed to be on the defensive. She spoke to him exclusively by phone and only on issues related to Sophia. When James saw his daughter, he tried to create a festive atmosphere for her. He wanted to fill the void that had formed in their life, but he felt that the girl had become quieter and more thoughtful. Perhaps she did not yet fully understand what was happening, but she definitely felt that something was wrong. "Dad," she once asked, clinging to him, "will we all still live together? I miss my mom." These words hurt James painfully. He stroked her head, trying to speak softly and confidently. "Baby, I love you and Mom, but now we live separately. That's how it should be. But we can still spend time together, okay? I will always be there." Sophia, as if having calmed down, smiled, but after a moment her face became serious again. "Dad, doesn't Mom need to come to us? I forgot my book there." James felt a lump in his throat. Until recently, a book with bright pictures was their family tradition at night. Now everything has changed. "We'll definitely bring you a book, honey," he promised. In the evenings, when Sophia returned to Hannah, dead silence reigned in the house. James began to notice that he was afraid to be alone with his thoughts. Sometimes he even tried to watch family videos, trying to understand when everything went downhill. He felt bitter and angry at Hannah, at Mark, at himself for failing to recognize the impending disaster. But the thought frightened him even more. What if at the next meeting the judge leaves his daughter with her mother for good? What if he only has to see Sophia on weekends and holidays? This prospect seems unbearable. One day, Carol, an old family friend, came to visit him. She invited him to dinner to unwind a little. However, James was depressed throughout the evening. Carol tried to support him. "James, I know how much you love Sophia. The court will not be able to ignore this. They will look at all the circumstances and will definitely take into account your role." He shrugged, looking away hopelessly. What if not? Hannah may have connections. She can afford a better lawyer. And then, usually the courts side with mothers. Carol shook her head. "Not always. Now the laws are changing. If you show that you can provide suitable conditions for Sophia, the court may well award you custody, or at least joint custody. You have to believe in it." These words were like a faint ray of light in a deep tunnel. James knew that it would be a long and difficult journey, but for the sake of his daughter, he was ready to do anything. Meanwhile, in Hannah's life, everything was not as smooth as it might seem. The weight of guilt and internal conflict weighed on her no less than on James. She understood that she had destroyed the family, committed a betrayal that probably could not be redeemed. But now she had another goal to save her daughter. Deep down, she doubted whether Sophia would really be better off with her. Her schedule was busy, and her relationship with Mark, which had started it all, no longer seemed so fairy tale. However, she tried not to think about it, immersing herself in work and preparing for the trial. Sometimes she woke up in the middle of the night, looking at Sophia sleeping, and thought that under no circumstances would she give her to James. However, James was aware of this attitude, and it only increased the tension. Each of their telephone conversations turned into a dry exchange of information. "What time do you pick up Sophia?" "At 6 in the evening." "Please bring her here at 8 on Sunday." "Fine. Goodbye." There was not a single extra question, nor an attempt to talk about anything else, as if they had become completely strangers. As the second trial approached, James felt the pressure mounting. The lawyer assured that they have a chance to achieve at least joint custody. James tried to remain calm, but the night before the meeting passed for him insomnia. He wandered around the house, stopping at the empty children's bed, remembering how he once rocked Sophia to sleep. It seemed that a happy life was somewhere far in the past, and now his existence was focused on only one thing: not losing his daughter. Every day he realized more and more clearly that even if he won the case, life would never be the same. The rose-colored glasses of unconditional happiness were shattered and replaced by a harsh realization of reality. But so far there has been no final decision. The judge gave time for the parties to gather evidence and confirm their ability and willingness to raise the child. The interim decision stated that Sophia lives with her mother for this period, and her father sees her according to the approved schedule. James felt that time was working against him, because the longer his daughter lived with Hannah, the less reason the court would have to take her away. But he wasn't going to give up. Week after week dragged on in agonizing anticipation. Every time James had the opportunity to spend time with Sophia, he tried to make those days as eventful as possible. Go to the zoo, ride the carousel, draw together, and watch her favorite cartoons. At the same time, he took photographs and recorded videos to show the court how strong his bond with his daughter was. But in the depths of his soul, it was bitter for him to realize that he had to prove his love and care to officials as if it were something to be assessed from the outside. It was only a few weeks after the judge made his interim decision, leaving Sophia to live with Hannah. Time passed painfully slowly, but meanwhile, each new day brought the same painful thoughts. What the fate of their daughter would be, whether they would be able to find a compromise, or whether the legal battle would drag on for months. Hannah tried to hold on. She constantly reminded herself that for Sophia's sake she had to be strong, despite the acute pain that the very fact of breaking up with her husband and constant conflicts caused. But one gray, cloudy Saturday, which seemed unremarkable, something completely unpredictable happened. In the morning, Hannah woke up in an anxious state, although she could not explain where this feeling came from. She looked into her daughter's room and was momentarily surprised to see a neatly made bed on which there were neither favorite toys nor a soft blanket. Something tightened inside. James must have arrived earlier, she thought, because the weekend, according to the court, belonged to her father. He could take Sophia for a day or even for the entire weekend. But usually Hannah always warned her daughter that Dad would arrive soon, and the girl happily prepared drawings for him. Now everything happened without her knowledge. It doesn't seem like Sophia was ready to leave. And most importantly, Hannah did not remember that James was supposed to arrive on this particular Saturday. And no call, no messages. Hannah hurriedly grabbed the phone and, not finding any missed calls, dialed James' number. There was no answer. The anxiety intensified, spreading to the whole body like a wave of cold. She tried to call again and again, but the phone remained stubbornly silent. Her heart was already pounding in her chest when Hannah, throwing on her coat, ran out of the house, barely having time to put on her shoes. She rushed to the car, putting the key into the ignition with trembling hands, heading towards the very house where they used to live together and where James now lived. Along the way, she tried to contact him, or at least find him through friends, but to no avail. 20 minutes later, she found herself near the entrance. A locked door, dead silence around, and no signs of the owner's presence. No one answered the knock. The light inside was turned off. Hannah stood on the porch, looking in confusion at the windows where they had once all watched evening movies together. The silence seemed deafening. A little later, through a lump in her throat, she managed to get through to Carol, a family friend. "Carol, do you know where James is? He took Sophia, but I have no news from him." There was some confusion in response. "No, Hannah, I don't know. We haven't talked to him for several days. Didn't he call you?" "No," Hannah whispered in despair and passed out, feeling tears welling up in her eyes. An hour later, she contacted the police, feeling fear bordering on panic. The officer on duty took her statement seriously, taking into account the complex divorce proceedings. From that moment on, everything started to spin. Police inquiries, formal reports, questions about whether James could have committed the kidnapping, and whether there had already been similar incidents. Miss Lawrence, Detective Hudson, a short man of about 40 with a piercing gaze, turned to her. "Are you sure that this is not a simple time delay? Maybe he just didn't warn you in advance?" "What do you mean, just a delay?" Hannah raised her voice for the first time. "Do you understand that he disappeared with my daughter without saying a word? This is not according to the rules of our agreement. I had to know when he would take Sophia and when he would return her back." "I understand," Hudson said thoughtfully, wincing. "But according to the law, if he had the right to take her away for the weekend, we must first rule out the possibility that he simply decided to extend the time." "Extend the time?" There was bitterness in her voice. "But he must report this, and his phone is unreachable. The detective recorded all the statements and promised to start a search. However, Hannah felt internally that everything was much more serious than the police might think. Scraps of conversations with James were spinning in her head, some moments that she did not pay attention to. She suddenly remembered that a couple of weeks earlier he had mentioned selling a share of the business, supposedly to cover legal costs. It seemed strange to her at the time, but she didn't attach much importance to it. The police gradually began to uncover a strange picture. It turned out that part of James's assets was indeed sold, and rather hastily. His bank account was suddenly empty, and the mortgage on his house was paid off just days before he disappeared. It seemed that he carefully planned everything in advance, cutting off financial ends. Hannah couldn't believe that James was so decisive and would take such a desperate step. Memories of the man she knew, a caring, attentive father, did not fit with the image of a man capable of absconding with a child and forging documents. However, the more details were revealed, the more obvious it became that he did this deliberately. A day passed, then too not a single call, not a single lead. Mark joined the conversation, trying to calm Hannah down. He couldn't have gone far. The police will find him through his banking transactions, he said, patting her on the shoulder. But there were no banking transactions. Since James' disappearance, none of his accounts have been touched. Apparently, he had withdrawn the money in advance and was now moving in such a way as not to leave traces. When a week passed and no new evidence emerged, Detective Hudson admitted that the case was extremely complex. The fact of divorce, conflicts about custody, all this spoke of a motive. James could have decided that he was losing the trial and chose to go into hiding with his daughter. The search geography expanded. A search application was submitted to federal databases. But it soon turned out that the day before his disappearance, James bought airline tickets in the name of a person who did not exist in reality. There were two of these tickets, and they were almost certainly purchased for him and Sophia. "We checked international flights," Hudson said. "With a high probability he could fly to Europe. We are monitoring passenger lists at airports, but so far the results are zero." Hannah listened to him in a state close to shock. "Are you saying that he took my daughter to another country? How could he do this unnoticed?" The detective spread his hands. "Fake documents, possibly. It's not that difficult if you have the right connections and money." Realizing that an official investigation was underway but moving slowly, Hannah considered hiring a private investigator. She did not believe that James could disappear without a trace in Europe. Surely somewhere he will leave a trace, some kind of clue. She knocked on the doorsteps of the police, demanding results, but they only repeated to her that they were doing everything possible. Days turned into weeks, but there were no results. The emptiness in her soul and the feeling of guilt for her own betrayal before her husband were mixed with despair in Hannah. Her daughter, her baby, was somewhere overseas, and she couldn't even talk to her. Most of all, she was tormented by the question, how is Sophia coping with this move? Does she understand why her dad took her away from her mom without warning? The only thing that truly supported Hannah during these difficult days was the belief that Sophia, no matter what, was loved. After all, James never harmed his daughter. Moreover, he was a very reverend father. It was impossible to understand how he could doom them to such a life full of fear and uncertainty. Perhaps he felt that the court would side with his mother and decided not to risk it. Or his mind was clouded by the pain of betrayal. Be that as it may, Hannah swore to herself that she would not stop until she found her daughter. She was ready to spend everything she had, pay any private detectives, contact any international organizations just to find Sophia. Mark offered support and resources, although their relationship became strained. In the time that had passed since the betrayal, Hannah realized that she did not want to build a long-term relationship with the man with whom she had destroyed her own marriage. The police repeatedly went to interrogate James' acquaintances and partners. Those who might have been involved in the fake documents also came to the attention of law enforcement agencies, but all to no avail. James, always a disciplined and intelligent man, developed a truly impeccable plan. On the 11th day after her disappearance, Hannah sat in Detective Hudson's office, looking at the grim statistics of such cases. It seemed that in most situations the children were found quickly if the father did not have sufficient resources to escape. But in James' case, everything indicated that he had prepared in advance. The large sum that disappeared from his accounts could have provided him and Sophia with a comfortable existence in a foreign country. Is there any chance that he will return her himself? Hannah asked quietly, clenching her hands into fists. Hudson looked at her with longing in his eyes. Ma'am, I can't give you false hope. If he is really determined to leave for good, it is unlikely that he will return of his own free will. But we keep looking. Hannah barely slept that night, running through possible scenarios in her head about where James might stay, how to arrange a life abroad, and whether he would eventually ask her for help. Maybe he wanted to offer her a deal, or did he hope that she would get tired of fighting? For now, the answers remain a mystery. The most difficult days have come for Hannah. An empty children's room, toys that no one will scatter throughout the house, and a painful silence where her daughter's clear voice used to be. No outbursts of feelings could drown out this pain that was tearing my heart apart. Spring rays gently touched the streets of a small French town, buried in greenery and flowers. Narrow cobblestone roads, neat houses with windows decorated with pots of bright flowers, and a leisurely, almost peaceful atmosphere became the new home for James and his daughter, Sophia, who now went by the name Emily. The move and adaptation were unexpectedly easy, although James still had the fear of being discovered in his heart. New documents, purchased expensively and carefully checked, allowed them to become completely different people. His name was now Eric Lehman, and his daughter was recorded as Emily Lehman. He quickly learned the French he had studied in his youth and got a job as a manager in a small hotel, which allowed them to live inconspicuously but quite comfortably. Emily, who until recently was Sophia, surprisingly easily got used to her new life in a few months. Perhaps her childhood consciousness turned out to be more flexible and open than he expected. Sometimes she asked about Mom, and then James, with pain in his heart, softly answered that Mom was very far away now and could not come. He hated lying to her, but he believed that someday he would be able to explain why they had to move so far away. The house they rented was cozy and small, with a small garden where Emily liked to play after school. Sometimes, looking at her through the kitchen window, James felt a pang of conscience, asking himself whether he had done the right thing by tearing his daughter away from her former life and mother. But each time he convinced himself that he had no other choice. He couldn't let the court separate him from his daughter. One evening, while putting Emily to bed, James sat on the edge of her bed and gently adjusted the blanket. "Dad, will we stay here forever?" the girl asked, looking at him with large, curious eyes. "I hope so, baby," he answered quietly, trying not to show his alarm. "Do you like it here?" Emily nodded and smiled. "I like our new school and Madame Renee, she is so kind. Only I miss my grandmother and mother. Will they be able to visit us?" James pursed his lips, holding back his emotions. "Not yet, my dear, but one day, maybe." She seemed to accept this explanation, closed her eyes, and quickly fell asleep. James sat next to her bed for a long time, listening to his daughter's quiet breathing and struggling with doubts and anxieties. Life gradually got better. He got used to his new name, to the calm rhythm of life in provincial France, to the smiles of his neighbors who nodded at him friendly every morning, heading to the market or for a walk in the park. Emily made new friends at school, and James even began to feel that he had finally found peace, albeit incomplete. Among the neighbors, Anne stood out, a young woman with a warm look and a kind smile. She lived next to her son, the same age as Emily, and often invited them to visit or simply came in for tea in the evening. Anne quickly became their close friend, asking no questions and respecting their privacy. But sometimes James caught her attentive gaze, as if she wanted to ask something, but did not dare. One evening, while the children were playing in the living room, Anne quietly said to him in the kitchen, "Eric, I see that you are constantly tense. You can trust me if you want to talk." James sighed, avoiding her gaze. "I appreciate your concern, Anne, I really do. It's just, Some things should stay in the past. She gently touched his hand. We all have a past. The main thing is that it does not interfere with your life. James was relieved by her understanding, but did not dare tell the truth. He was afraid that any carelessness could lead to the past overtaking him and Emily and destroying everything that he had so carefully built. In the evenings, when Emily fell asleep, James often sat on the terrace, looking at the stars and remembering life. He thought about Hannah and how she was now coping with the absence of her daughter. This thought caused pain mixed with guilt, but even this feeling could not convince him to go back. One thing was clear to him. He and his daughter could not return without running the risk of losing each other. Life in a small French town gradually became familiar and comfortable for James and Emily. Local residents accepted them as their own, although they continued to see them as mysterious foreigners with a mysterious past. But this only added to their charm. James quickly gained respect in his new job. He proved himself to be a talented and organized manager of a small hotel, where tourists happily stayed again and again, attracted by his friendliness and impeccable taste. His working days were filled with meetings with guests, solving everyday issues and managing personnel, which helped him take his mind off the constant internal stress. Emily has grown a lot during this time. Her French became almost perfect, and the girl easily chatted with local children, quickly making new friends. James noticed that she was becoming more confident, courageous, and independent. Every morning, walking her to school, he watched with tenderness as she, energetically waving a small pink backpack, ran towards her classmates. At such moments, he felt proud and relieved his daughter was happy, which means he did everything right. On weekends, he and Emily often went on short trips around the area. The French province was filled with cozy villages, ancient castles, and picturesque landscapes. Each such trip turned into a small adventure, filling their lives with vivid memories and helping James feel closer to his daughter. One day, they went on a picnic to the Loire Valley. James carefully prepared. He bought Emily's favorite cakes, freshly baked bread, and several types of French cheese, and also took with him a book of fairy tales that Emily loved to listen to before bed. "Dad, which of these towers belong to the real princess?" Emily asked, looking at the ancient castle rising on the hill. James smiled, sitting down next to her on the grass. "I think every one of them, baby. After all, each tower should have its own princess, and the knight who protects her." She smiled, clinging to his shoulder. "Of course," he hugged her tighter, feeling the warmth in his chest. "And I will always be your knight." That evening, when they returned home, James was putting Emily to bed. The girl looked at him with serious, thoughtful eyes. "Dad, thank you for living here. I love being Emily." James's heart sank for a moment, but he quickly pulled himself together, smiling. "I'm glad you like it, my love. The main thing is that you are happy." She nodded and closed her eyes, soon falling into a deep sleep. As the weeks turned into months, James noticed that every day his bond with his daughter became stronger. They shared everything with each other, joys and experiences, successes and small failures. Sometimes Emily came to his work after school and helped greet guests who could not resist her charm. Over time, their house became a place of attraction for neighboring children and their parents. James, always cordial and open, began to organize small holidays and family evenings where children's laughter mixed with adult conversations and pleasant music sounded. It was at such moments that he felt that life had regained meaning and taste. Anne became a frequent visitor to their home, and James noticed that he was increasingly enjoying her visits. The woman knew how to support him in difficult times. A long time has passed since the day James and Sophia disappeared from Hannah's life, leaving behind only a painful emptiness and unbearable memories. Over these years, her life has changed dramatically. A few years after her daughter disappeared, she remarried, trying to find support and stability. Her chosen one was an influential politician from Washington, David Kensington, a man with a strong character and impeccable reputation. Hannah became part of an elite society where her life was filled with luxurious receptions, social events, and endless public events. It seemed that she got everything she could have dreamed of. She was surrounded by luxury, attention, and respect, but in her heart Hannah remained deeply unhappy and lonely. Over time, she had a second daughter who was named Mia. The girl looked like Hannah, smart, bright, and energetic. But despite all the love Hannah felt for her youngest daughter, it seemed to her that no amount of emotion could fill the gaping hole left by Sophia's disappearance. Outwardly, Hannah continued to maintain the image of a successful and happy woman, skillfully hiding her inner pain. She surrounded Mia with care and attention, trying to convince herself that her heart had already been healed. But every evening, when the house fell silent and the lights went out, she was left alone with her thoughts, which invariably returned to Sophia. Hannah did not stop searching for her daughter for a single day. She hired the most experienced private detectives, spending huge sums of money to check even the most insignificant leads. The detectives repeatedly promised her results, but each time it ended in nothing. Detectives followed James' tracks across Europe, studied airport passenger lists, and checked bank transactions, but not a single lead led to any real results. Every year, Hannah's hopes faded, but she did not allow herself to give up completely. One evening, sitting on the terrace of her luxurious home, Hannah looked through photographs of Sophia taken shortly before her disappearance. In the photographs, the girl was smiling, her blue eyes shining with happiness. Hannah felt the lump of grief and guilt welling up inside her again. "Mother?" Mia's quiet voice was heard. The girl stood in the doorway, watching her mother with concern. "What happened, honey?" Hannah quickly hid the photographs and smiled at her daughter, trying to hide her tears. "Are you thinking about her again?" Mia asked quietly, coming closer. The girl had long known the story about her older sister and understood how much her mother was suffering. "Sometimes it seems to me that I'm always thinking about her," Hannah admitted bitterly, carefully hugging her daughter. "But I love you too, my girl. I just can't stop thinking about your sister." Mia sighed and hugged her mother tighter. "Would you feel better if you found her?" Hannah thought about her daughter's question, which had been tormenting her for many years. "I think so," she finally answered. "I need to know that she is alive, that she is doing well. Without this, I cannot find peace." Days, months, and years passed, and Hannah continued to live as if in two parallel worlds. One was her ideal family with David and Mia, and the other was endless longing for her lost daughter. Even the support of her husband, who tried to be a support for her, could not eliminate this inner emptiness. David saw Hannah's pain, but did not always understand how to cope with it, often immersing himself in work and leaving his wife alone with her experiences. One day, several years later, Hannah received a message from another detective, whom she hired to search for Sophia. "We have found evidence that your ex-husband and daughter may be in France," the detective told her over the phone. "This is not 100% confirmed, but there is something to work on." Hannah felt her heart beat faster. "Are you sure? We're checking everything again, but this is the first real trace in recent years. I'll let you know if anything else comes up." After this call, Hannah found hope again. She couldn't think of anything else, trying to imagine what her daughter looked like now after so many years. "What does she like? What are you interested in? Does she remember her mother, or did James erase her memories of the past?" Hannah told her husband everything. David tried to support her, although he was afraid that the new hope would end in another disappointment. "I have to be honest with you, Hannah," he said one evening, squeezing her hand tightly. "I'm afraid that this endless search is destroying you. Maybe you should try to let go of this past." "Let go?" Hannah looked at him with pain. "You don't understand, David. I can never let my daughter go. I have to know that everything is fine with her, otherwise I will never find peace." Since then, the search has resumed with renewed vigor. Hannah hired the best specialists, sent agents to France, and waited for news, hoping that her persistence would one day pay off. The evening bustle conveyed the solemnity of the moment. A lively public flocked to a charity exhibition organized in one of the fashionable hotels. Guests were greeted with delicious treats, small talk, and endless rows of paintings, each of which revealed the story of its author. Hannah, who came here at the invitation of her husband, rushed between conversations with influential people and vain attempts to hide her chronic boredom. It was always difficult for her to feel organic in such events. Out of habit, she politely smiled at familiar faces, but inwardly remained distant. Her gaze wandered over the walls filled with works of art from classical landscapes to abstract compositions. The exhibition was dedicated to the theme family and home, which involuntarily touched the most painful points of Hannah's soul. She was about to return to her husband when she suddenly stopped at a small painting painted with light oil strokes. The canvas depicted a man in a gray coat and a girl of about 12. They stood against the backdrop of a picturesque embankment flooded with soft sunlight. The girl, enthusiastically looking at the blue glow of the water, smiled, and the man watched her with a kind smile. Hannah took a few hesitant steps forward, her heart beating faster. Looking at the picture, she felt like the whole world was narrowing down to this tiny fragment. The man's facial features, a high forehead, a straight nose, slightly sad eyes, all this seemed painfully familiar to her. And the girl, silky blonde hair, blue eyes, and a smile in which Hannah saw the reflection of her own daughter. Sophia. She involuntarily raised her hand to her lips, feeling a lump forming in her throat. Even though so much time had passed since Sophia's disappearance, she could not confuse her daughter's features with anyone else. But is it possible that it is them? After all, the people depicted looked so calm, carefree, as if no storm could touch them. Is it really James? Is this really my girl? Flashed through Hannah's head. She checked the signature in the corner of the painting. The artist's name is something like P. Raymond didn't mean anything to her. She immediately went to the exhibition organizers, intending to find out who the author of the work was and whether she could contact him. With the help of a curatorial assistant, she learned that the artist was a young Frenchman traveling the world. He was just present in the hall now. Having found him, Hannah stood next to him, trying to pull herself together. The guy looked to be in his early 20s, dark-haired, with an energetic sparkle in his eyes. Monsieur Raymond? Hannah addressed him quietly. He turned around, smiling. Yes, madam. How can I help? I saw a picture of a man with a girl on the embankment. It is signed with your name. Can you tell us something about her? It is very important for me to know the history of this plot. The guy frowned slightly, thinking. Yes, sure. I wrote this work during a recent stay in France, in a small town. I found it very touching how father and daughter enjoyed their time together. I often find inspiration in simple moments of human connection. They were so happy. Have you communicated with them? Hannah felt her voice tremble. Or maybe you know what their names are. Unfortunately, no. I was just walking along the embankment with a sketchbook. I noticed how they were standing at the parapet, talking, laughing. I wanted to capture this scene, so I sketched it out. They seemed to be locals, or at least people familiar with the place. Then, when I was already sitting on the bench and finishing the details, they left. Hannah took a deep breath, trying to remain calm on the outside, even as her emotions raged inside her. Tell me, when was this? About 6 months ago, madam. At the beginning of spring. I stayed there for about 2 weeks and then moved on. This is very important to me. Hannah's voice trembled. Do you not remember any details? Maybe their speech, accent? What were they talking about? The guy thought about it. Well, they spoke French, but the man had a slightly strange accent. However, many foreigners eventually get used to the language and retain their accent. The girl spoke quite fluently, almost flawlessly, but still her speech sounded a little different. I remember how she laughed, pointing to the water where large white swans were swimming. Did they look happy? Hannah asked quietly, looking at the picture. Yes, the artist smiled. That's what attracted me. Such simple but tender tenderness between father and daughter. Hannah shuddered, remembering how she once felt next to James and how tenderly he treated their daughter. Monsieur Raymond, she finally said, clenching her hands, can I ask you a favor? If you remember the exact place or name of the town where you saw these two, please let me know. This can be extremely important. The artist, struck by the sincerity of her voice, nodded and rummaged through his phone. I think I still have photographs of the surrounding area. Here, look, the commune of Lavine, not far from Lyon. A very quiet place, there is a beautiful embankment. Exactly there. Hannah's heart leapt in her chest. She looked at the title and seemed to see a ray of hope, pointing to a possible path to her lost daughter. Thank you. Thank you very much, she said chokedly. I owe you. The young man was slightly embarrassed. Glad to help. I hope you find what you are looking for. Hannah did not go into details, politely said goodbye and headed towards the exit, clutching in her hand a piece of paper with the name of the place that the artist wrote down for her. Her heart was pounding as if she had just experienced a severe shock, but along with fear, new hope flared up in her. In the taxi heading back home, Hannah couldn't take her eyes off the name of that commune. Could this really be James and Sophia? She repeated to herself. Or did I just see what I wanted to see? But whatever the reality, for the first time in years, she had a more concrete trail than any vague rumors and assumptions of detectives. Leaning towards the window, she looked at the passing lights of the night city and felt how a long-forgotten sense of determination was being revived in her. If there really was any chance of finding her daughter, Hannah was willing to risk everything to get to the truth. After all, the life of not just a certain person was at stake, but part of her own soul. The silence of the night enveloped the luxurious mansion, muffling the barely audible ticking of the clock. There was tension in the air, although no one except Hannah herself knew that this night would be her last within the walls of the house, where she spent several years of her life with her husband and little Mia. All week she walked around not herself, trying for the 100th time to overestimate her own decision. But looking at the luxurious halls, photographs with David and Mia, feeling the cold splendor around her, Hannah realized that she could no longer live in this closed world without Sophia. The picture, accidentally seen at a charity exhibition, completely stirred her soul. Now she was sure that her daughter was alive, that she was somewhere in a small French town, perhaps right now breathing fresh air on the embankment and not suspecting how her mother was looking for her day and night. Hannah looked around her spacious bedroom, filled with designer furniture, and suddenly realized that all these luxuries would never replace the simple warmth of family. She quietly walked up to Mia's bed, saw her daughter peacefully sleeping, and felt a pang of conscience. After all, when she left, she was leaving her too. But now, as a faint ray of moonlight illuminated her youngest daughter's innocent face, Hannah prayed that Mia would one day forgive her. For she, Hannah, could not do otherwise. She left a neatly folded note on her daughter's bedside table. There are only a few lines in it. Forgive me, dear. I have unfinished business that I must complete for the sake of our family. I hope one day you will understand and forgive me. Take care of yourself and be happy. A short admission of guilt, a short promise to return, without specifying exactly when. Slipping out of the house, Hannah felt her heart beating wildly. David didn't even suspect that his wife had been planning an escape for a long time. She booked a ticket to Paris, then changed trains towards Lyon, and then planned to get to the commune that the same artist told her about. In the dead of night, while all the servants were asleep, she took only the most necessary clothes, documents, and some cash. She left everything else a life of luxury, her reputation as the wife of an influential politician behind. Flying to France alone was scary, but Hannah was driven forward by an unquenchable inner fire of hope. Along the way, she never closed her eyes. Images of Sophia and James, whom she saw in that picture, flashed in her head. Although so many years had passed, she knew that she would recognize them from 1,000. She must find them. When she reached Lavony, a small commune lost among the green hills near Lyon, it was already morning. Having rented a tiny room in a modest guest house on the outskirts of the town, Hannah almost immediately set out to explore the area, getting lost in the narrow cobblestone streets. Here everything seemed different, warm, measured, devoid of gloss and pathos. But this simplicity had its own magic. She started from the embankment described by the artist, peering into the water of the river, where the ancient houses were reflected, trying to imagine the very moment when father and daughter stood at the parapet. Local residents, busy with their own affairs, looked at her with slight curiosity. Hannah didn't know French well enough to feel at ease, but she tried her best to explain herself. After exchanging a few phrases with people passing by, she asked if they had seen a man and a girl, perhaps foreigners, speaking with an accent. The answers were vague. Maybe we saw it. Many tourists come here. I don't remember anything. Try asking in the cafe around the corner. The owner notices a lot. But Hannah did not give up, meticulously collecting scraps of information. She breathed this town, absorbed all the details, the smell of fresh baked goods, which were put on the counters in the morning, sounds of bicycle bells, the measured splash of water on the stones of the embankment. Sometimes she would panic, what if James and Sophia were no longer here? After all, the artist saw them 6 months ago, and even then Hannah had no guarantee that it was them. But these thoughts were immediately replaced by a firm conviction. She could not leave without trying everything possible. Every day she returned to the embankment, wandered through small cafes, talked with waiters, and looked at passers-by. She felt that time was passing unbearably slowly and was afraid of missing a chance at any second. And yet, despite the fear and guilt of leaving her husband and daughter behind, determination grew inside her. It seemed to her that the spirit of the city was guiding her, as if whispering, "Search, don't stop." On the third day, when her strength was running out, Hannah came to the embankment a little earlier than usual, even before dawn. There was a light fog, the river seemed calm and almost mirror-like. She walked, leaning on the cool stone parapet, peering into the slowly awakening city. Suddenly, a familiar voice was heard from the left, a low male laugh, which instantly made her heart skip a beat. Turning her head, she saw a male figure in a tweed jacket. A slender blonde teenager stood next to him. She was a little taller than Hannah remembered her Sophia being, but her eyes and features. Her mother's heart could do no wrong. Hannah froze, afraid to blink, as if reality itself was ready to dissipate with one click. It was him, James, and Sophia. Only now her daughter was almost an adult, but her features, posture, and facial expression were similar to those that Hannah had seen when the baby was very tiny. Father and daughter stood at the railing, talking enthusiastically about something, laughing from time to time. The girl straightened a stray strand of hair, and in this movement Hannah recognized herself. Her knees were giving way. Stunned by her own emotions, she did not immediately decide to take a step. She was not sure that her legs were capable of supporting the weight. How many times in her fantasies did Hannah imagine this meeting? How she runs to her daughter, hugs her, apologizing for all the mistakes of the past. But in reality, everything turned out to be too crazy, too deafening. She took an uncertain step forward, but then froze, staring at her family's faces, which were separated from her by many years and countless kilometers. Tears in the eyes blurred visibility, and the heart was pounding loudly in the ears. She couldn't find the words. She didn't know what to call Sophia, who seemed to have responded to another name for a long time. How to approach James, whose treacherous lies and secret life had robbed her of her daughter. But at the same time, Hannah understood. Here it was, the goal of her long search, about which every heartbeat screamed, and all grievances, all reproaches pale before the jubilation that is born from one glance at a living, healthy daughter. James, suddenly aware of the prying eyes, turned around. Their eyes met. For a few seconds, the whole world seemed to freeze. His gaze reflected shock, recognition, and perhaps fear, and Hannah stood there, unable to move, unable to squeeze out a word. Sophia, or now Emily, also turned around, surprised by her father's reaction. And now she looked straight at Hannah, not understanding why the unfamiliar woman suddenly began to cry, looking at her as if she were a miracle. Tears flowed down Hannah's cheeks, and inside everything was screaming. My girl. She didn't know what to do, what to say, what to do. She understood only one thing. At that moment, fate took a sharp turn, and even if she did not have the strength to speak, nothing would be the same. Hannah froze in place, feeling her whole world shrinking to the size of this small embankment. There was a dull hum in my ears. My heart was beating so loudly that it seemed like everyone around me could hear it. She could not take her eyes off Sophia, her girl, who had grown up so much, becoming almost unfamiliar, but at the same time painfully dear. Gathering her last strength, Hannah took a cautious step towards her daughter, trying to smile through her tears. The girl looked at her with surprise and some caution, clearly not understanding why the unfamiliar woman was looking at her so intently. "Hello," Hannah said quietly in English, hoping to awaken at least some memory in her daughter. Sophia frowned slightly and answered in French, with a slight interrogative tone. "Hello, Mrs. Are you doing well?" The girl's gaze was polite and slightly wary, but with absolutely no signs of recognition. This instantly broke Hannah's heart. "You, you don't remember me?" she asked in a trembling voice, trying to cope with the emotions overwhelming her. Sophia looked back anxiously, searching for James. "Papa?" she called, slightly alarmed. James was already approaching them at a brisk pace, his face tense and wary. He put his hand on his daughter's shoulder, calming her, and looked at Hannah coldly. "What are you doing here, Hannah?" His voice sounded quiet, but with a clear warning and firmness that was not there before. He looked at his ex-wife without fear or regret, with defiance and readiness to defend what he now considered only his own. "James, please," she began, struggling to hold back her sobs. "I've been looking for you for so many years. Let me talk to my daughter. She must find out the truth." "The truth?" He smiled bitterly. "The truth about how you destroyed our family, or how I was forced to hide my daughter from you and your new husband so that she would not be taken away through the courts." His words sounded harsh and unyielding. Hannah felt another wave of guilt and anger rise within her at the same time. "You took her from me. You didn't give me a chance to fix everything." Hannah's voice broke into a scream, attracting the attention of passers-by. She immediately lowered her tone, trying to control herself. "You had no right to decide for both of us." "Didn't have the right?" His voice dropped to a cold whisper, but this made it sound even more threatening. "You gave up your right the day you betrayed us. You lost her trust, and you lost mine too." Sophia restlessly looked from her father to the unfamiliar woman whom he called by name. She tried to understand what was going on and why their family conversation suddenly became so tense. "Dad, who is this woman? Why is she crying?" she asked anxiously, clinging to her father's sleeve. James knelt down on one knee, looking into his daughter's eyes. "Emily, this is a woman from my past. She has nothing to do with us. It's okay, we'll leave now." "No, wait." Hannah stepped forward, desperately reaching out to her daughter, as if trying to hold on to the slipping opportunity. "Sophia, I'm your mother." Sophia froze, opening her eyes wide and taking a step back. She cast a frightened glance at James, who immediately stood between them like a human shield. "Go away, Hannah," he said quietly and harshly, covering his daughter with himself. "You don't belong here. You made your choice a long time ago." Hannah felt her legs become weak. She realized that now she would achieve nothing but more pain, but she was not going to give up. "I won't leave until she knows who I am," Hannah answered defiantly, wiping away her tears and trying to maintain at least a drop of dignity. "Do what you want." James looked at her coldly. "You can call the police, go to the courts. I don't care. I won't give it to you. Never." Sophia restlessly grabbed her father's hand, quietly saying something in French, as if begging him to take her away from here. "We're leaving," James said over his shoulder, turning to his daughter. "Everything will be fine, honey. I'm with you." Hannah stood motionless, looking after the retreating figures of father and daughter. Tears flowed down her cheeks again, mixing with despair and powerlessness. She came here with hope, and now she is left alone on an empty embankment, feeling like a stranger and lost in an unfamiliar country. Hannah spent the whole night on the embankment. The cold wind froze her skin, her fingers ached, but she seemed rooted to the stone parapet, unable to leave. The water shimmered in the moonlight, lulling the city with its slow river. The tears had long since dried, but the inner numbness did not go away. She didn't know where to go or what to do next. A storm of feelings was raging in her soul, and silent silence reigned around, only occasionally broken by the noise of cars or the distant cry of a night bird. With the first rays of dawn, Hannah rose from her seat, slowly stretching her numb arms and legs. She was drawn into a feeling of strange numbness, but she forced herself to take a few steps along the wet stones. Only one thought throbbed in my head. I can't leave without trying again. No matter how many times James kicked her out, no matter how much guilt she felt towards her second family, a decision had already matured inside. Leaving now meant losing all hope. The sleepy city began to wake up. Small bakeries opened, people began to appear on the streets, rushing about their business. Hannah wandered aimlessly, just not to leave the embankment. Her feet themselves led her to the very place where the day before she had encountered James and Sophia. Another attack of pain squeezed her heart, but she remained standing at the parapet, looking at the river. Suddenly, Hannah heard someone's hurried steps and muffled singing. Turning around, she saw that same girl, her Sophia, who was now called Emily. Sophia walked alone, apparently. Her father let her go for a short walk, or she went out on her own while James was busy. The girl seemed to be in a good mood. From time to time, she picked leaves from the branches near the parapet and threw them into the water, laughing as the current carried them further. Hannah held her breath. She understood that approaching was a risk, but staying away turned out to be even more painful. She had just taken a small step forward, about to call out to her daughter, when Sophia suddenly stumbled. Her foot slipped off a wet stone at the water's edge, and the girl, losing her balance, instantly fell into the river. There was a frightened scream, a splash of water, and there was a terrible silence. Hannah didn't hesitate for a second. Her heart almost jumped out of her chest when she, without taking off her outer clothing, rushed into the water after the child. The ice burned her skin, and it was almost impossible to breathe, but Hannah rowed with all her might toward her daughter, desperately looking around. Sophia did not seem to be able to swim well, or was confused, choking and floundering erratically. Hannah dived towards the girl, grabbed her by the shoulders, and, fighting the current, began to pull her towards the shore. When, breathing heavily, Hannah somehow pushed Sophia onto the stone slabs, James was already standing on the embankment. He rushed over after hearing the scream, and now, seeing that it was Hannah who was saving the girl, he froze for a moment in bewilderment. But immediately, putting aside all differences, he ran up and helped them get out to the dry area. The girl coughed, shivered from the cold, water flowed from her clothes in streams. Hannah herself was having difficulty breathing, but continued to hold Sophia's hand, afraid that she would lose consciousness again. "Alive?" James asked hastily, squatting down next to his daughter. There was panic in his voice. "I think so." Hannah squeezed out these words, trying to stop trembling. "We need to warm her up quickly." James wanted to say something, but instead, pulling himself together, he busily motioned for Hannah to follow him. "Our house is nearby. Let's go." Both were soaked to the skin. He picked Sophia up in his arms, and she buried herself in his shoulder, still coughing. Hannah, staggering, followed. If only yesterday someone had said that James himself would let her under his roof, she would never have believed it. But now all the grievances have receded, giving way to the most pressing task to preserve the life and health of their daughter. Passing through the gate, they entered a spacious house with high windows overlooking the embankment. Almost unable to feel her fingers from the cold, Hannah helped James carry Sophia to the sofa. He immediately took blankets from the closet and brought towels. Sophia was still trembling, her eyes were half closed, and only a hoarse cough indicated that she was conscious. Hannah carefully removed the girl's wet jacket. James sank down next to her without further ado. It was clear that he was no less worried, although he was trying to control himself. It seemed that the very moment of their confrontation on the embankment remained somewhere behind the scenes. Now only one thing was important to both of them, Sophia. "Thank you," James said quietly, looking into Hannah's eyes. "You saved her." She remained silent, trying not to burst into tears from the overwhelming feelings. James awkwardly touched her shoulder, as if for the first time in all these years he wanted to show not hostility, but something similar to gratitude or understanding. But Hannah just nodded, unable to answer. Sophia began to cough harder, and Hannah instinctively sat next to her, stroking her back. Catching the familiar gesture, the girl looked up at her. There was still anxiety in them, but curiosity broke through the veil of fear. At that moment, Hannah felt such a sharp wave of love and tenderness that she could barely resist hugging Sophia tighter and not throwing out all the painful melancholy. James got up and quickly went to the kitchen for hot tea and something warm. The quiet splash of water dripping from wet clothes and Sophia's ragged breathing filled the living room. Hannah looked around, spacious rooms, warm interiors, toys scattered in the corner. This was the house where her daughter had lived all these years, and it seemed so close and inaccessible at the same time. But now there was only one thing to think about. Sophia was safe. She was not seriously injured. James returned with steaming cups in his hands, and they began to wrap the girl in dry blankets. Silently, still wary and awkward, but in this short calm, something important began to emerge: the understanding that this situation could no longer be ignored, brushed aside, or crossed out. Whatever happens next, now all three are under one roof, and old scores give way for a while before the need to save their common treasure, their daughter. The dense evening darkness fell on the house near the embankment. Hannah and Sophia's wet clothes were drying by the fireplace, which was quietly crackling with warmth. There was a barely noticeable aroma of tea in the air, which everyone did not have time to finish. An endless tension lay between Hannah and James, filling the living room with an invisible stream of unspoken feelings and questions. Sophia had already fallen asleep in one of the bedrooms on the second floor. The girl was tired after the experience. Her small body, trembling from cold and fear, finally received a break. Hannah helped put her to bed and quietly adjusted the blanket, trying not to wake her. Her heart was heavy with the realization that her own daughter was lying literally a few steps away, and she, the mother, had no idea whether she knew about her existence. Going downstairs, Hannah saw James standing by the window. He seemed to be watching the dark river flow lazily in the moonlight. Lightning from memories pierced her consciousness. Once upon a time, they stood together in exactly the same way, admiring the starry sky, making plans for the future. Now between them lies a gap of 8 years and countless grievances. Hannah wanted to find the words, but suddenly realized that she did not know how to start a conversation. Her heart was beating so fast that she was afraid to hear its echo in the silence of the room. In the end, she pulled herself together and said quietly, "How is she?" "Sophia." More precisely, Emily. The words were difficult to come by. James turned around, his face cold and hard. "She fell asleep. No doctor was needed. It was just mild hypothermia. Thank you for saving her." He said this mechanically, as if making a forced concession. Hannah couldn't help but tremble in her voice. "I only did what anyone would do. Besides, I'm her mother. I could never leave her in trouble." James sighed heavily, tearing his gaze away from the window and looking straight into her eyes. "She doesn't remember you, Hannah. For her, you are just the woman who pulled her out of the water and whom she saw only once before. I'm afraid nothing good will come of your sudden appearance." Everything inside Hannah broke, as if a cold hand had squeezed her heart. She herself understood perfectly well that Sophia, who grew up under the name Emily, did not even suspect the existence of another life. But hearing it straight from James hurt more than she could have imagined. "I can't," she began, shaking her head, feeling tears welling up in her eyes. "I can't just leave when I know my daughter is here. I've been looking for her for so many years. James, He frowned as if he was about to end the conversation, but something in his gaze softened. Probably the memory of how Hannah threw herself into the river, preventing Sophia from drowning, was already changing his attitude. "You have someone to return to," he said more quietly than before. "You have a new family, a husband, a child. Why did you come here? Why are you complicating things again?" Hannah clenched her hands, trying to control herself, but despair broke through. "I can't live without Sophia," she whispered, tears rolling down her cheeks. "I love Mia with all my heart, but this does not cancel my feelings for my first daughter. I kept thinking that Sophia was dead or hated me. I was going crazy from uncertainty, and when I found out that you might be in France, I just couldn't sit at home and pretend that everything was fine." James listened as if trying to find falsehood in these words, but saw only sincere pain. Despite the deep gulf between them, he understood that Hannah was still important to his daughter, at least in terms of biological ties. This understanding made him feel uncomfortable, because for many years he had convinced himself that Sophia would be better off without her mother, who had cheated on him. "Let's say," he said slowly, "suppose I let you talk to her. What's next? Will you tell her the whole truth, why she left us, or will you try to convince her to return to the States with you? Do you realize that Emily's whole life is here now? This is her home, friends, school." Hannah was afraid to answer, because she herself didn't know where it would lead. She only understood that she could not turn around and leave now. So she put her hand on her heart, almost pleading. "Let me at least talk to her, explain who I am. After all, she must know the truth. You can't keep her in the dark forever." James looked away, nervously tapping his fingers on the armrest of his chair. "She's not the little girl you remember," he said quietly. "She has her own life, her own dreams. She calls me the only parent, and there has long been no place for a mother in her story. I didn't." He paused, feeling mixed emotions. "I didn't want to hurt her. I just thought at the time that it would be right." Hannah felt herself overcome with endless pity for herself, for James, for her daughter, whom fate had deprived of her family. She took an uncertain step towards him, touching his shoulder, although not long ago he would have pulled it away. "I don't blame you for trying to protect Sophia," she said softly. "But do you really want her to grow up not knowing that she has a real mother who loves her? Don't I deserve at least a chance to ask for forgiveness?" There was a painful silence. James seemed to be fighting with himself. Memories of how Hannah cheated on him and ruined their happy life arose before his eyes. But he also remembered how she threw herself into the icy water to save Sophia without thinking about herself or the consequences. "Okay," he finally said, sighing heavily. "I'll give you a chance to talk to her. But I warn you right away, she may not want to listen to you. I won't bother her, but I won't force her to answer you either." The words sounded harsh, but there was a concession in them that Hannah could only dream of a few hours ago. She again felt tears of relief, barely audibly whispering, "Thank you. This is what I ask. At least one conversation." James nodded, stood up, and walked towards the door leading into the corridor. "In the guest room, there are things about my wife, ex-wife." He stopped mid-sentence and, embarrassed, corrected himself. "In general, take something dry before you get a cold. We'll talk more tomorrow. I wouldn't dare wake her up, and you yourself can barely stand on your feet." Hannah looked after him, feeling bitter joy. It had been so long since they had communicated peacefully that now this short exchange of words seemed almost miraculous. Nevertheless, she understood that the most difficult was yet to come. Tomorrow she will have to meet her daughter, who does not know her and, most likely, is in no hurry to accept a stranger into her life. When Hannah found herself in the small guest room, she could not sleep for a long time. Outside the window, the river flowed slowly, reflecting the moonlight. Countless thoughts were spinning in my head. What would she say to Sophia? How to explain all these lost years? Will her daughter be able to understand and forgive her? But despite the anxiety, Hannah's heart beat with dull hope. Tomorrow she would have the chance to meet her daughter, and it would be worth weathering any storm for that. The most important thing, Sophia is alive, healthy, and right now sleeping on the floor above. And Hannah, albeit subtly, felt that their paths were finally crossing again. This was all she had prayed for all these years. The early morning was still gray and sleepy when Hannah woke up from a light knock and quiet steps outside the door. Anxiety and curiosity immediately stirred in my heart. After all, this house was so alien and at the same time so close. She ruffled her hair with a sigh and threw back the blanket. A difficult morning lay ahead. Opening the door, Hannah saw on the threshold of the room a thin girl with big, serious eyes, her daughter. The girl stopped, nervously fiddling with her pajama sleeve. "Ah, hello," Hannah exhaled, holding her breath. Sophia, embarrassed for a second, took a deep breath, and an expression of determination crossed her face. "My name is Emily," she said in French, clearly trying to speak clearly. "But Dad said I used to be Sophia." "And what?" The girl hesitated, looking down. That you are my mother. Hannah's heart sank hearing the word mom spoken with such tension and disbelief. She took half a step forward, trying to remain calm and friendly. Yes, I'm your mother, she answered quietly. Your dad and I once lived together, and then he took you away. I've been looking for you for a very long time. Sophia said nothing in response. They simply looked at each other for a few seconds, and then the girl turned sharply and walked down the stairs. Hannah, feeling her stomach pounding, followed her. The morning silence reigned on the ground floor, broken only by faint sounds outside the window. Sophia's father, James, seemed to have already gone for a run, as he usually did at dawn. The girl stopped in the living room, crossed her arms over her chest, and looked at Hannah defiantly. Dad said that you have another family somewhere in America, and that you are married and have another daughter. This is true? Hannah didn't immediately find what to answer. Under Sophia's heavy gaze, she felt as if she had returned to that day of judgment when everything went downhill. Yes, that's true. Then why are you here? Sophia interrupted, raising her voice, which sounded resentful and angry. If you have another daughter and husband, why do you need me? Sophia's words hit me hard in the heart. Hannah tried to remain calm, knowing that the girl felt betrayed and confused. You have always been and will be my daughter, she said quietly, trying to make her voice soft. Just because I have another family doesn't mean I stopped loving you. Sophia laughed bitterly. But you weren't with me all this time. Dad says you left us. Strike again. Hannah tried to hold back her tears. I made a lot of mistakes, I don't argue. She faltered, searching for words. But I never stopped loving you, and I didn't know where you were. I've been looking for you all this time. The girl seemed to be struggling with a wave of feelings. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and said in one breath, You know, Dad said you don't belong here. He was going to talk to me today, but I'm not little, I can tell myself. You, there was a trembling voice, pack your things and leave. I don't want it all to fall apart. My life is here, understand? Hannah felt like everything inside her had collapsed. The daughter's words sounded like a sentence, cold and irrevocable. Sophia. She began, quietly pronouncing the girl's old name, hoping to awaken in her at least memories of her former love. No, she interrupted, stamping her foot. I'm not Sophia, I'm Emily, and I don't need another mother. I don't know you, and I don't want to know you. Tears ran down Sophia's childish cheeks, and she quickly wiped them away with the back of her hand. Hannah involuntarily took a step forward to hug the girl, but she pulled away as if afraid of the touch. I want you to leave, Sophia repeated a little quieter, but still insistently. Please just go to your family. For Hannah, everything broke down. Tears came to my throat. She understood that for the girl, this meeting was a shock and stress, and that it was difficult for her to believe in the sincerity of the feelings of a person who had been somewhere far away for so many years. All she could do was hang around in a pitch-black void of guilt and powerlessness. Okay, I won't put pressure on you, Hannah finally managed, swallowing the lump in her throat. But please let me stay at least a little longer so we can talk. Give me a chance. Sophia pursed her lips. She didn't answer, but doubt flashed through her eyes. Then she hurriedly left the room, went back upstairs, and slammed the door. Hannah was left alone in the silence of the living room, feeling her hands shaking and tears welling up again. She sank down onto the old sofa, covered her face with her palms, and could not hold back her tears. A few minutes later, she heard the front door open and James' familiar footsteps. Apparently, he returned from a run. Hannah quickly wiped away her tears, although her gaze remained full of pain. She had to tell him about the conversation with her daughter and understand whether he was ready to keep his promise yesterday and give them a chance to talk, or whether Sophia had already said her last word. Several days have passed since Hannah moved into the guest room of the waterfront house. The atmosphere remained tense. Sophia stubbornly avoided talking to Hannah, and James looked tense and, trying to be as correct as possible, kept withdrawing into himself. It seemed that life hung in a strange limbo. That morning, the sun's rays cheerfully made their way through the curtains, and everything around seemed to hint that the weather was whispering about a walk. Sophia more precisely, Emily timidly asked her father if they would go out for a walk along the embankment. James nodded, glad that his daughter seemed to be slowly recovering from the shock of the last few days. He was about to call a taxi or just walk. Hannah, seeing them getting dressed, decided to ask, "Can I come with you?" "I'll try not to interfere, it's just. I haven't left the house for a long time," she added, trying to show that she didn't want to intrude. James and Sophia looked at each other. The girl winced, but didn't say anything out loud. There seemed to be dissatisfaction in her gaze, but she did not object to her father. And Hannah, sensing a tiny glimmer in her cold attitude, hurried to throw on a light jacket and join them. They walked leisurely along the embankment, where the warm breeze slightly rippled the reflection of the houses in the water. Sophia walked a little ahead, trying to stay close to her father and look back at Hannah less often. She, understanding the girl's mood, walked a step behind, trying to behave as delicately as possible. At some point, she still dared to speak to Sophia. "Emily, maybe you'd like some ice cream. There seemed to be a wonderful little kiosk here." Sophia, without turning around, remained silent, as if she had not heard. James cleared his throat out of politeness. "I can buy you ice cream if you want." The girl just shook her head. Hannah looked down at the ground, feeling a lump in her throat. Suddenly, she noticed familiar figures approaching along the embankment from the direction of the old bridge. At first, she thought she was imagining things, but when they approached, there was no doubt. It was David and little Mia. David held the girl's hand, and she seemed excited by the change of scenery. Hannah gasped, stopping. James and Sophia also stopped and looked at each other. They did not understand who these people were, but after a couple of seconds, everything became obvious. David and Mia came close, and David's face showed something between reproach, concern, and relief. "Hannah," he said, releasing his daughter's hand and fixing his gaze on his wife. "We looked for you everywhere. I couldn't sit at home not knowing where you were and what was wrong with you. Mia insisted on coming with me." The little girl timidly looked out from behind her father and, noticing Hannah, sighed with relief, but then frowned. "Mom, you left and didn't say anything," she said quietly. I was afraid." Hannah didn't know what to say. On the one hand, her heart broke at the sight of little Mia, whom she also missed. On the other hand, standing next to her was Sophia, the one for whom she escaped. Everything was mixed up in her soul. "David, Mia," Hannah began, looking from them to James and Sophia. "Why did you come?" "To take you home," David answered slowly. "I understand that you are looking for your daughter, but think about Mia, about me. We are worried. You can't just disappear." Hannah pressed her lips together, feeling a lump rise in her throat. I I can't go back. I found Sophia, and I can't leave her again. Understand, I have to win her trust, show that I didn't abandon her." David raised his eyebrows slightly, then glanced quickly at James and Sophia, who were standing a few steps away. Mia, meanwhile, was carefully hiding behind her father, not understanding what was happening. "What about your life in America?" David asked, trying to speak calmly, but there was resentment in his voice. "We have a house, we have plans." "I'm sorry, but now the main thing for me is Sophia." Hannah straightened her back, trying to speak firmly. "Mia is my daughter, I love her very much, but you. You know how I suffered all these years, not knowing what happened to my eldest daughter. I have to stay here." "What about Mia?" David burst out. "Do you think it will be easy for her without her mother?" Hannah's gaze darkened, and a twinge of guilt passed through her cheeks. She slowly crouched down to be at Mia's eye level and looked into her face. "My sunshine, I love you, and I will never stop loving you. But now," Hannah swallowed back tears, "I have unfinished business here. I know David will take good care of you. I don't want you to suffer, but alas, this is how it happened." Mia pulled away a little, tears and childish misunderstanding shone in her eyes. "Mom, won't you take me with you?" she whispered. "I want us all to be together." Before Hannah could respond, Sophia suddenly interrupted the conversation. The girl took a step forward and said harshly, "Here, see, you already have a daughter. Why do you need me?" Sophia's voice trembled, but there was stubbornness in it. "Please go away. I don't want everything to change here because of you." Hannah's gaze darted between her two daughters, one she had not seen all her life, and the other whom she had left in the States to search for. My heart was breaking with the understanding that she would hardly be able to please both of them, and no one would be able to understand the full depth of her torment. "Sophia, please," Hannah whispered, taking a step towards the girl. "I don't want to hurt you. I just want to be close." "No," she shouted again, backing away. "I don't need another mother. Let her go with her family, Dad." She cast a pleading glance at James, who was still standing silently, as if not knowing which side to take. Seeing the tension growing, he finally raised his voice. "Calm down, everyone. This is a public place. If you want to sort things out, let's do it somewhere else." Hannah felt like she was between a rock and a hard place. On the one hand, her own husband and little daughter, who came for her across the ocean, and on the other, her eldest daughter, whom she refused to leave for the sake of the second. The realization of her own guilt and the impossibility of finding a compromise made her want to burst into tears on the spot. "I'm sorry, David," she said quietly, turning to her husband, "but I really will stay. If you want, you can stay here with Mia, but I can't leave." David frowned with displeasure, but looking at Hannah, he realized that she would not change her mind. Mia burst into tears, feeling that her mother was going to reject them for someone else's girl. And Sophia, looking at all this, just clenched her fists and looked away, stubbornly repeating, "I don't need her." Months passed, and Hannah's life changed radically. It seemed to her that the days were passing painfully slowly, but time inexorably made its changes to the fates of all participants in this drama. She returned to the United States, although not immediately. The difficult weeks in France did not bring the desired result. Sophia, or already Emily, never accepted her back into her life. Any step towards rapprochement ended in cold misunderstanding or open hostility. James, seeing his daughter's pain, asked Hannah not to torture the girl anymore. He did not threaten lawsuits or threaten consequences, but made it clear that Sophia wanted to live as before and did not need her mother, who had once so abruptly disappeared from her world. By that time, both Mia and David were also in France, hoping that Hannah would come to her senses and return to the family. But week after week went by, and seeing that his daughter was becoming increasingly withdrawn and his wife was wasting her last strength on hopeless attempts, David could not stand it. He announced that he was filing for divorce if Hannah was not ready to leave with him and Mia. Too much pain had accumulated in the family, and the resentment that Hannah left without warning was too strong. Hannah hesitated, but after Sophia's next refusal to communicate with her, she realized that she no longer had the strength to fight. She returned to America with them, but the marriage could no longer be saved. The cracks between her and David were too deep. Soon they filed for divorce, maintaining polite relations for the sake of Mia, who, however, was increasingly taking family conflicts harder. The girl withdrew into herself, blaming her mother for leaving for France and for how their once happy life had collapsed. Now Hannah lived in a small rented apartment in another state, away from the bustle of the capital. She tried to keep in touch with Mia, who moved in with her father. But every call, every rare time together turned into strained dialogues and painful silence. Mia seemed cold, almost indifferent. Her eyes showed the disappointment and precocity that too often occurs in families torn by conflict. Hannah worked as an interior designer, returning to her favorite craft in order to somehow escape from painful thoughts. Clients praised her taste, her work progressed steadily, but she felt almost no joy from her professional success. In the evenings, left alone, Hannah involuntarily looked at photographs, once happy pictures with Sophia, very tiny and rare moments from life with Mia. The bitterness and guilt did not go away. Over and over again, images from France came to mind. An old house on the embankment, Sophia in a light dress, stubbornly looking away, James standing between them, is like an impenetrable wall. Hannah understood that now the doors to that life were completely closed for her. No courts, no threats or requests will return her eldest daughter, who made her choice, or at least considered herself free from the past. One evening, while sorting out her things, she found a stack of letters and notes. Once these were reports from detectives who promised to find traces of James and Sophia, the very moment when she found out that they were hiding in France. Then Hannah believed that it would be enough to find them, and everything would return to normal. Now these papers seemed to her like a tragic mockery. She had really found her daughter, but they had completely lost each other. One day, Mia, who nevertheless came to her for the weekend, asked if there was any chance that Sophia, the one with whom her mother had gone to France, would become her friend. Hannah couldn't find the strength to respond with words of hope. She just shrugged and said quietly, "I don't think she needs that right now." Deep down, Hannah still hadn't lost a shred of faith that time could change things, could heal wounds, and allow Sophia to one day want to know who her mother was. But for now it remained just a dream, hidden deep, deep. Accepting her new reality, Hannah acquired a certain sad maturity. She learned to live alone, to enter a new day without the support of a large family. Previously dependent on other people's love and recognition, she now became her own master, although she did not feel satisfaction from this. As autumn turned the trees golden again, Hannah sat on the terrace of her small house, holding in her hands an old photograph of Sophia and James taken before all this drama. In it, both looked at the camera and smiled at her. Everything seemed so simple, so real. "I'm sorry," Hannah whispered, looking at the photo. She spoke to her daughter and to herself, and to the time when they had a real family. But the words hung in silence without response. This was her new life, an endless search for the lost past and life for the sake of her daughter, who is nearby, but far away in spirit. Her own guilt and pain, and at the same time a quiet hope that one day, perhaps, at least Mia will be able to forgive her and return the warm communication that they had before. And Sophia, she remained in another world, where her mother could not achieve her recognition. The last rays of the setting sun spread across the quiet street, and Hannah once again told herself that she needed to learn to move on with her life. Accept losses, realize your own mistakes, but also find the strength to move forward. After all, life does not end, even when all dreams collapse. Sometimes you have to start over no matter how painful it is. She raised her eyes to the sky, in which light autumn clouds floated, and slightly raised the corners of her lips in an attempt to smile at herself and the world. There was no room for a happy ending in the fact that the girl she had been looking for so many years did not recognize her. But Hannah believed that at least now Sophia was safe, loved by her father, and living a happy life. And to some extent, it was this awareness that helped me continue to breathe, wake up in the morning, and find the strength to live. She may never hug the girl she once affectionately called Sophie, but she is alive and well, which means there is a quiet justice in this. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.